This is the next in the Patriot Minute series. I'm Grandpa Rick. We're going to talk about Leonidas and the 300 Spartans and a critical secret they offered, a message they offered, especially for America today. It's an amazing story, one that is seldom told. We see this popular story of the 300 Spartans shown in film and so forth, but there's more to this story that needs to be discussed. We're going to talk about it. Years ago, I stood alone on sacred ground at the pass of Thermopylae, where this great battle was fought. With a mind and heart that was schooled in the heroes of our past, I had come to know many of these heroes intimately, including the valiant men who once, long ago, spilled their precious blood in the dust at my feet there at Thermopylae that day. When I was standing there that day, I realized this. That special evening I was there, I came to understand why not all of America's stories and heroes originate in America. And there on that sacred ground, I came to know the secret that the 300 hoped America would one day, when it was most needed, understand. In the first and second decades of the 5th century BC, the Persian dictator Xerxes I, also known as Xerxes the Great, the god king of the mighty Persians, determined to conquer the small, mostly free city-states of Greece. This would be a prelude to a general European invasion by the grand, undefeated, omnipotent Persian Empire, led by Xerxes' special forces known as the Immortals. In preparation for this campaign, for his campaign, Xerxes amassed the greatest army in history. The Persian Empire reached from the Indus Valley on the east, north into North Africa on the west, and on the south, the Arabian Sea, and northwest into what would become Anatolia, Asia Minor, or Turkey today. Containing well over 2 million square miles, amazingly, the Persians successfully conquered and held these lands without modern transport techniques and technologies of modern communication as well. It's really quite incredible what they did and how they set it up. At this pivotal time, the Greeks were a loose collection of city-states of freedom-loving peoples who often did not get along, unfortunately. People with a common language and a religion, common and customs common, yes, but who struggled to agree on just about anything. Still, the Greeks, particularly Sparta and Athens, believed that they had a winning advantage over the slave empire of Persia. In a universal worldwide age of slavery, they surmised, they prided themselves, in fact, that they were free men and women. And as free souls, they would always have the advantage, they thought, over any empire of shackled thralls under the lash of a tyrant king. But there was something that they missed. The two most powerful Greek city-states were Athens and Sparta, rival cities that believed their own individual autonomy was more important than uniting as one fighting force to resist this Persian onslaught that was rolling their way. At first, most Greeks believed this. Fortunately for the Greeks at large and for Sparta and Athens at the time, they each had one wise leader. For Athens, it was Themistocles, and for Sparta, it was King Leonidas, which means lion. Both of these men, they keenly understood the deadly nature of the Persian hordes sweeping towards them, and both understood what they needed to do to rally their people. It was, in fact, to tell them the truth, for unless the Greeks could somehow unite, they didn't stand a chance. Losing to Xerxes in Persia would mean the execution or the castration of the men and boys, and the abuse of the women and girls and their enslavement. In reality, the Greeks would cease to exist as a people, along with their religion, their history, and their culture. This was simply the facts that they faced. If Xerxes got his way, future generations would not know anything about the Greeks. The fact that they had existed as free men for a time would be wholly scrubbed from historical records, much like our history books, in fact, are being rewritten today by totalitarian forces among us and within this country. And no one would be permitted under the penalty of death back then to speak the names of their heroes, such as King Leonidas. Some of the Greek city-states, like Thessaly, Argos, and Thebes, decided to appease Xerxes, and they joined with the Persians, hoping they might somehow, foolishly of course, avoid the fate that awaited Athens and Sparta. They knew what would happen at the defeat when someone was defeated by the Persians and the Persian hordes. Many of the Spartan elders, unfortunately, hated Athens with a white-hot passion, so they refused to fight with them. Prejudice, the universal curse of mankind from the beginning of time, was especially strong among the Greeks. King Leonidas, almost alone among the men of Sparta, determined that the only way to beat the Persian army was to fight on ground so confining, so restricted and tight that the vast Persian numbers would mean little or nothing. The place that King Leonidas chose to stand was called the Hot Gates, or Thermopylae, a steep rocky strait that was less than 300 yards wide and located next to sea cliffs that rose vertically and next to the ocean. So this was located about 120 miles northwest on the main road from Athens. Sparta's senior council of men, however, did not want to fight so far from their homeland of Sparta, which was, of course, further down the road from Athens. So Sparta's elders withheld their fearsome army, using the celebration of a religious festival as the excuse for keeping their troops at home. But King Leonidas, he'd promised the other Greeks to lead the combined Greek force at Thermopylae. He would not break his oath. So he left his home, his family, and his people, taking only his personal hand-picked bodyguard of 300 warriors. And these 300 were not controlled by the Spartan council, but solely under the command of the king. They were all fiercely loyal to King Leonidas and would march with their king anywhere he needed to go. Leonidas chose only those men who had a son at home to carry on the family name and to care for his mother and sisters. It's important to note that the Spartans were passionately loyal to their laws, which they considered sacred and essential to preserving their country and their freedom. Moving at a rapid pace, perhaps faster than any other army before or since could march on foot, these men were all extremely athletic, even ripped, focused on endurance in battle over muscle mass, able to fight hand-to-hand all day and long into the night and continue on. This little force of Spartans, leading several thousand Greek volunteers from allied cities, reached the Thermopylae Pass just before the Persians arrived from the north. There they prepared for battle. The tyrant Xerxes and his mega army, which numbered at least 200,000 men and probably many tens of thousands of camp followers and 1 million horses and other livestock, casually moved into the valley that faced the pass of Thermopylae, and they set up their camp. Greek historians claim that the Persian army was so massive that as they moved through Asia Minor, which is Turkey, of course, and then over into Greece, that they drank the rivers dry and they stripped the grass from the valleys and fields down to the bare dirt. Massive army. Pausing before Thermopylae at the Hot Gates, the dictator Xerxes seemed fascinated by the Spartan warriors who he found he could see them fortifying the pass. He watched them working from a distance. The Spartans would then sit on the rocks, sharpening their iron weapons, their swords primarily and spears, polishing their bronze armor to a perfect luster, and combing their long hair. Such men had built a fearsome reputation with the Persian emperor and his generals. Xerxes had an advisor, in fact, Demaratus, who was an exiled Spartan king who had betrayed the Greeks and was now working for the Persians as an advisor. Demaratus told Xerxes that the seemingly casual Spartan response of sitting there sharpening their weapons, resting, combing their hair at Thermopylae was proof certain that the Spartans intended to fight to the death. Arrogantly, which was his infamous character, Xerxes would not take the Spartans seriously, for there were so very few of them, until he first sent his forces against them. And a side note, Xerxes, when he was building a bridge across the waters between Turkey and the European landmass, there's a narrow neck of land there by the Dardanelles, he had boats lashed together, and his engineers built a bridge. But then a storm came up and it destroyed the bridge and the boats. And Xerxes, in his rage, had all of the engineers executed, and then he had someone take him out in a boat onto the waters, and he whipped the water with his bullwhip to punish the waters for having dared challenge him, the great god emperor. These heavily armored and highly disciplined, battle-hardened Spartans gave not an inch to the thousands of Persian soldiers and cavalrymen that Xerxes sent against them. Spartan shields and Spartan valor could not be broken, though Xerxes sent wave after wave of soldiers into the Hot Gates to attempt to smash through Spartan lines. It seemed hopeless. The Spartans, in fact, were seemingly superhuman. Finally, Xerxes sent an emissary to try to get King Leonidas to surrender their weapons and go free unmolested, he said. Leonidas told the Persians he would not surrender even a handful of Greek soil, and that if they wanted their weapons, they should come and take them, or in the Greek, Moulin Labe. Xerxes was enraged, but again and again his troops were driven back by the Spartans. His advisors pressed him to send in his best troops, his own personal bodyguard. Xerxes reluctantly agreed, bringing up his immortals, his finest, best armed and trained soldiers, personal bodyguards to the king, in fact. Once more, the Spartans pounded and shredded these men. Thousands of Persians lay dead and dying in their own blood on that narrow ground facing Thermopylae. When I was there, I tried to imagine what this must have looked like, what it must have been like to see this incredible, history-changing, history-saving event. Again, Xerxes tried to get the Spartans to leave. His spokesman saying to the Spartans, "Tomorrow we will black out the sun with our arrows," meaning that the Persians would shoot an endless number of arrows at the Spartans, that they would not see the sun through them. There would be so many overhead. Up to that point, both armies had faced each other in open, hand-to-hand combat. It was considered the coward's last resort, in fact, to finishing an enemy by shooting them from a distance with arrows. The Persians, in fact, blacked out the rays of the sun by shooting thousands of arrows at the same time. That's true. Though both sides knew that this would be a dishonorable way to retreat a worthy enemy. It was the coward's way. But even though threatened to black out the sun, a Spartan soldier responded to Xerxes' envoy by saying this regarding the shameful use of arrows in the millions to block out the sun. He said, "Good, then we will fight like men in the shade." It appeared that Xerxes would never drive back the Spartan defenders. He was running out of time. His men were becoming terrified of the seemingly invincible Spartan hoplites, thinking that perhaps they were gods, and wanting to retreat back to Persia and forget this hopeless venture. Even his generals had lost their confidence. Then, a Greek traitor named Ephialtes came to Xerxes in the night and revealed that a secret path, an old goat trail, went through the rugged mountains surrounding them, a path that would come down on the far side of the Thermopylae Pass, and the Persian contingent could slip over the mountains on this path in the dark at night and surprise the Spartans from the rear, trapping them. So Xerxes paid the traitor well and sent his immortals up and over the mountains on this secret path, led personally by the Greek traitor Ephialtes. And that's a name, even to this day, is cursed by many Greeks, just as we curse the name of Benedict Arnold in America today. How many Americans do you know named Benedict? It's like Ephialtes, a synonym for traitor. King Leonidas' scouts reported to him that part of the Persian army would soon cut them off from their rear over the mountain and surround them in the narrows of the Hot Gates. Hearing this, Leonidas knew they could no longer defend the straits and the main road to Athens and Sparta. So he called a council and sent most of the Greek allies safely back to their homes to fight another day. But he and his 300 would remain and fight to the last man to defend the pass of Thermopylae. Spartan law, which the Spartans had all sworn an oath to uphold, required that when facing an enemy that vowed to destroy their nation and people, that they would never surrender nor retreat. With most of the Greek allies safely pulled back, the Spartans prepared themselves to meet their gods. The Persian hordes came at them from all sides. King Leonidas and his 300 used their close quarter formation of fighting in a triangle formation, each soldier with overlapping shields, fighting to protect the brother next to him. Then finally they were wiped out completely when the Persians shamefully again pulled back and rained arrows down on the last standing Greek warriors. Though dying alone in this remote rocky pass in Greece, the Spartans clung to their code. Spartan law to the end, a creed that strengthened and inspired their lives from birth to death. More so, it demonstrated to the world their love of honor, family, and country, of their beliefs, of their faith, of liberty or death. And while the Spartans also believed some things that we do not admire today, that's true. But I believe that the Spartan nation and the Spartan people, led by Leonidas, and the Spartan code of honor was all created by a God who knew that it would take such a people with such an unbending warrior ethic and commitment to stop the dictator Xerxes and the murderous totalitarian empire he led from conquering and enslaving the world, particularly European lands. Much like America's greatest generation, who stood against the overwhelming Nazi and Japanese imperialist power in America's last century, and who continued the struggle, unbending against the chains of Soviet communism until the USSR collapsed in 1991. The Spartans set the example for us all, never bowing to a tyrant, no matter how threatening or financially seductive. They responded only to their own sacred nomos, or law, as free men. But there's more. Because of their sacrifice, Leonidas and his 300 heroes inspired the rest of Greece to rally and finally unite that next year and defeat the Persians, first at the Battle of Salamis and later at the Battle of Plataea on the plains west of Athens. Even in death and defeat, Leonidas had brought the world victory over despotism. At Thermopylae, Xerxes' mighty Persian army fought and through treachery barely overcame the 300 Spartans and their allies under the command of King Leonidas. But upwards of 20,000 Persians were sacrificed by their tyrant king at the Hot Gates against unyielding Spartan bronze and iron will. It was a Pyrrhic victory, if any victory ever was. And that next year, at the Battle of Plataea, the Persians didn't face a token force of 300. But 10,000 Spartan hoplites leading an army of 70,000 free Greeks, all with blood in their eyes to avenge the 300. The Persians, though still outnumbering the Greeks 2-1, were massacred and driven back into Asia. Western Europe would never be threatened again by barbaric Asian hordes until after Christianity was firmly in place throughout the continent. Without the Spartans and Spartan leadership and sacrifice, it is quite possible that Europe at that time, being blessed with the beginnings of personal freedom and democracy, could have had those seeds of liberty destroyed in infancy by a totalitarian Persian juggernaut of the Middle East and Asian variety. What would become a democratic Greece and then Rome that embraced republicanism, which would later accept Christianity, which led to the Enlightenment and the Age of Discovery and the grandeur of Western civilization, all could have crumbled before history's eyes had there not been a Leonidas and his 300. We know that the Greek warriors rowing into the bloody sea battle at Salamis shortly after Thermopylae, they were outnumbered 3-1 by the mighty Persian fleet. The Greeks synchronized their strokes by chanting, Eleutheria, Eleutheria, freedom, freedom. They understood, they knew what was at stake, even the common man among them. When faced with the tyrannical totalitarian threat, everything, family, religion, livelihood, most of all liberty, is at stake. At that point, all of these blessings, which come from God, became sacred and irreplaceable. They are priceless, especially today. My beloved children and grandchildren, never let anyone tell you that the choices individual men and women make don't matter, that things just happen, that you can't make a difference by yourselves. That is one of the greatest lies ever told. It's propagated by Lucifer and by the relativist secular progressive elites who are his shock troops in America and the world today. They're determined to break your will. Broken, you will be easier to control, to corrupt, than to shackle. Like the Persian threat of old, and as I've warned for years, the greatest danger we face today from abroad comes from communist China. Still, and shockingly, many America's elites, our politicians, media, sports celebrities, and corporate leaders try to offer cover for the Chinese, hiding and ignoring the many atrocities, evil acts that they carry out daily. Attacks against America from China include the release of COVID from a Chinese lab, theft of American commercial and state secrets and intellectual property, sending thousands of spies to America, buying off and bribing American leaders, buying thousands of strategic acres of American land near our military bases, funding many destructive leftist causes in America, while enslaving and murdering their own peoples at home. If you are bold enough to accuse China, guaranteed you will be charged with hate speech or racism against the Chinese people. They've learned from Chairman Mao very well. That's how the left rolls. These are deadly serious issues, my friends, which our leaders are purposely keeping from us and which prevents many from making correct choices regarding our security, our freedom, and our prosperity. I can't say this enough. The choices you make matter. History is not made by cataclysmic events or by luck. Certainly such factors play a role, but more importantly, true history is made by individual men and women and the choices they make every day. Great people, worthy people, like Leonidas, Will Travis, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, Mother Teresa, Paul of Tarsus, Simon Peter of Galilee, Jesus of Nazareth. The choices we make, the secret that Leonidas and his 300 tried to teach us, will have lasting impact and changing impact upon our families and upon our lives for generations and upon our world. God help us with each passing day, like Leonidas, to choose wisely, truthfully, and courageously. I appreciate your time. I'm Grandpa Rick.